During the middle of the 1990s, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, and Kaiser Permanente made a discovery that significantly elevated the risk for 7 out of 10 of the top causes of mortality in the United States and the world. It should be noted that the exposure I am referring to is not a chemical that is used in packaging or a pesticide. Childhood trauma is the cause. All right, just what kind of traumatic experience am I referring to here? In this context, I am not referring to failing a test or losing a basketball game on purpose. I am referring to dangers that are so severe or pervasive that they physically penetrate under our skin and impact our physiology. These dangers include things like being abused or neglected, or growing up with a parent who struggles with mental illness or chemical use. On the other hand, for a considerable amount of time, I regarded these things in the manner in which I had been instructed to regard them, either as a social problem, for which I would refer to social services, or as a mental health problem, referred to mental health services. After that, something occurred that caused me to reconsider my entire strategy once more. After I completed my residency, I wanted to move somewhere where I would be able to make a difference, and where I would feel like I was an essential part of the community. Consequently, I worked for California Pacific Medical Center, which is widely regarded as one of the most prestigious private hospitals in Northern California. Together with my colleagues, we established a clinic in Bayview Hunters Point, which is an area in San Francisco that is considered to be among the most impoverished and underserved. Before that point, there was only one pediatrician in the entire Bayview area who was able to treat more than 10,000 children. As a result, we decided to open our practice, and we were able to provide high-quality medical care to all patients, regardless of their financial situation. It was a great experience. Access to care, immunization rates, and asthma hospitalization rates were the typical health disparities that we addressed, and we were successful in achieving all of our statistical goals. We were filled with a sense of immense pride. After that, however, I became aware of an unsettling tendency. There were a lot of children who were sent to me for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. But when I completed a comprehensive history and physical examination, I discovered that I was unable to diagnose ADHD in the majority of my patients. The vast majority of the children I was working with had been through such tremendous trauma that it seemed as though something else was taking place all along. In some way, I was overlooking something significant. Now, before I did my residency, I did a master's degree in public health, and one of the things that they teach you in public health school is that if you're a doctor and you see 100 kids that all drink from the same well, and 98 of them develop diarrhea, you can go ahead and write that prescription for dose after dose after dose of antibiotics. Or you can walk over and say, "What the hell is in this well?" I started reading anything I could get my hands on concerning the effects that being exposed to adversity has on the developing brains and bodies of children, and I read all I could discover. When my colleague finally made his way to my office, he asked me, "Dr. Burke, have you seen this?" And I was surprised to hear his words. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study was the name of the research study that he was holding in his hand like a duplicate. My therapeutic practice, and eventually my career, were both altered as a result of that day. Everyone ought to be aware of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which is something that requires their attention. Together, Dr. Vince Felitti of Kaiser and Dr. Bob Anda of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, conducted a study in which they questioned 17,500 adults about their history of being exposed to what they perceived to be adverse childhood experiences, often known as ACEs. Abuse of any kind, whether physical, emotional, or sexual. Neglect of any kind, whether physical or emotional. Mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, parenting separation, divorce, or domestic violence are all examples of these types of situations. On your ACE score, you would receive 1 point for each yes that you answered. The next step that they took was to establish a correlation between the scores of this ACE and the outcomes of health. Surprisingly, they discovered something. There are two things. First and foremost, adverse childhood experiences are extremely widespread. 1 in 8 people, or 12.6%, had 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. 67% of the population had experienced at least one ACE. Another thing that they discovered was that there was a dose-response association between adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and health outcomes. This means that the greater your ACE score, the more negative your health outcomes will be. Individuals who had an adverse childhood experiences, ADC score of 4 or higher had a relative risk of developing chronic obstructive pulmonary disease that was 2.5 times higher than that of individuals who had an ACE score worth 0. Additionally, it was 2.5 times what it was for hepatitis. There were 4.5 times as many cases of depression. For suicidal ideation, the number was 12. An individual who had an adverse childhood experiences, ACE, score of 7 or above had a risk of lung cancer that was 3 times higher than the average lifetime risk and a risk of ischemic heart disease that was 3.5 times higher than the average in the United States of America. This makes perfect sense. That much is obvious. After looking at these numbers, some individuals remarked, "Come on, because you had a difficult upbringing, you are more prone to engage in behaviors that are detrimental to your health, such as drinking, smoking, and engaging in other activities." None of this is scientific. Just put, this is very poor behavior. This is precisely where the scientific method comes into play, as it turns out. We now have a better understanding than we ever have before of how early exposure to adversity impacts the growing minds and bodies of children than we ever have before. It affects regions of the brain, such as the nucleus accumbens, which is the center of the brain responsible for pleasure and reward, and has been linked to substance dependence. It can block the prefrontal cortex, which is essential for the regulation of impulses and executive function, an essential region for the learning process. Additionally, MRI scans reveal discernible variations in the amygdala, which is the region of the brain responsible for the fear response. It is essential to be aware of the fact that individuals who are subjected to high levels of adversity are more inclined to participate in high-risk conduct. This is because there are true neurobiological explanations for this phenomenon. However, it has been discovered that even if you do not engage in any high-risk behaviors, you still have a greater likelihood of developing diseases such as cancer or heart disease. The reason for this is due to the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is the stress response system that drives our fight or flight reaction. This system is located in both the brain and the body. This is how it operates. Imagine for a moment that you are strolling through the woods and you come across a bear. As soon as this occurs, your brain sends a signal to your pituitary, which then sends a signal to your adrenal gland, telling it to release stress hormones. It's adrenaline and cortisol. As a result, your heart begins to beat faster, your pupils begin to expand, and your airways begin to open up. You are immediately prepared to either fight the bear or flee away from it. And if you are in the middle of a forest and there is a bear, that is amazing. This system gets activated over and over again, and it swings from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. The difficulty, however, is what occurs when the bear comes home every night, and this system is activated over and over again. The fact that children's bodies and brains are still in the process of developing makes them more vulnerable to the recurrent stress activation that they experience. The shape and function of the brain are not the only things that are impacted by high doses of adversity. They also affect the growing immune system, the developing hormone systems, and even the way that our DNA is read and transcribed. Thanks for watching. Kindly like and subscribe for more videos. In the comments section of the post, please tell me how many you discovered.